Good evening, everybody.
Couple talk off, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay. So we're starting a new chapter here. And it's a short chapter, I think. Let's see what we have here. So it says the tour. מפני שצריך לדקדק בשיעור העיסה, שלא להרבות בה משום חשש חימוץ. So he says, right, that since you have to be careful not to make the dough too large, as we talked about already, like yesterday and the day before, don't make it too large. So he says, since you have to worry about that, because it may come to leaven, mutab sheima'et ba lachen. So he says, therefore, better to make it smaller. So he says, therefore, טוב לקרב עיסה יחד בשעת הפרשת חלה, דשמא יש בהם שלא היה בה שיעור, ואם לא הפריש מן העיסה, יתנם בסל, והסל יצרפם לחלה. Okay, interesting. So he says, right, that therefore what we do is that you should bring the dough together at the time of the giving of the challah, separating the challah. Why? Because maybe there is that they don't have the proper size. So if you didn't separate them from the dough, the challah, you can put them in the basket, right? That's a trick. You put it in the basket, and that combines them, and that'll combine them for the size of challah. So even though, right, separately, they're all not large enough, for separation of challah, but when you put them together in the basket, they are. So it says, if it was known that there was a size for challah in the dough, and if you forgot to separate the challah until after the baking, so it says then you don't really need even to combine it with a basket because it's already large enough as it is. So it says what you do is you take one of the loaves and you can separate from there for all the loaves. So why is that? Because when you made the dough, it was already large enough as is, and then you separated them to make them smaller loaves. So if that's the case, you don't really need a basket because it already became obligated for challah when you had a big dough. So therefore, right, you just separated from one of the loaves. That's what he says. So he says, so it says even if he forgot, right, to separate the challah. So what does that mean? He ate, started to eat it. And then he remembers, oh, gee whiz, I didn't separate the challah. So he can do it at that point also, even though he's eating it right now. You can still do it. That's what he's saying. So he says, why is that? What's the reason why? Because in Chutz La'aretz, right, in the diaspora, you can just keep on eating and, save a little bit for challah in the end. You don't have to do it in the beginning. Okay, good. So let's see the Bet Yosef here. So the Bet Yosef, he says, right, that regarding what the Torah just said, that to make it smaller, he says it's obvious. In other words, you don't want to be right on the border, right? So, of the size that we mentioned, right, which is 3.5 pounds. So therefore, the proper thing to do is to make them small. So what does that mean? Make it like 1 pound, let's say, right, or a half a pound, right, each one. So that's good. If I remember correctly, each pound is 454 grams, right? If so, so you could have a dough you could have a matza which is 200 grams, right? As we said yesterday, that's pretty normal. You can make it 200, 300, 400, right? Whatever. It's still much smaller than the maximum size, so you're good. Okay, so right. In other words, so Beit Yosef is telling you that this is obvious. I mean, in other words, what does that mean? It's obvious. It's obvious that you shouldn't make it right on the border. You should make it smaller. Common sense. Okay. So he says, therefore, right, as we mentioned in the tour, what was the idea there? That if you do make it small, right, you can put them in a basket and it'll be combined in terms of the challah, separation of challah. So this way you can kill two birds with one stone, as they say, right? What does that mean? On the one hand, the lobes won't be too big, so there won't be any concern about leavening. So the lobes can be quite small. On the other hand, right, you want to do challah, so okay, you want to do challah, fine. So put it in a basket and combine them, right, in a basket, and it'll be obligated to do challah. So this way you accomplish both tasks here. That's what we're saying. Okay, so it goes on. So as we said, right, there's two ways to accomplish this. Right, the tour mentioned. What are the two ways? One is to make the various, right, the lobes, right, stick them together a little bit, so this way they're considered to be like one piece. That's one way to do it. So you can separate the challah. The other way is to put them in a basket, as we said, right? So one or the other is good. Okay. And then it goes on, Umash katav ve'im lo ifrish min ha'isam itnem besal. And then he says, right, if you didn't separate from the dough, so then what you do is put them in a basket, right? So in other words, we have two options, right? One is if you want to do the challah, which you should, the chatchila, if you want to do the challah before you bake it, that's the proper thing to do. So what should you do? Right? You don't have the size in each loaf. So what you do is you stick them together, a little bit until they're like connected. And this way they're considered to be like one piece. So this way you can separate the challah right now when you do that, right, before the baking. But, right, the other option is if you forgot to bake it, if you forgot to stick them together and to take the challah before the baking, so what you can do is after the baking, right, put them in a basket and that'll combine them and you can separate from there. So you can separate already from the baked loaves also, if you forgot to do it before. Okay, good. So it says Bet Yosef regarding that. Perek Elu Ovrin, right? What's the source for this? Over there in the Gemara. Memchet Amud Bet. Amar Rav Yosef, Hanen Neshe Didan, Naug Lemefa Kafiza. So it says Rabbi Yosef in the Gemara there, it says, our women, the custom is, so he says, right, that I'm going to just read through this Gemara for 1 second and then I'll explain it because, we're going to see probably the Rashi here, right, who explains it. So he says, Dekam mefakea ale midi chala, amale de'avdan ki Rabbi Eliezer, Detanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, הרודה נותן ותן סל מצרפן. אמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל הלכה כרבי אליעזר כתב ספר התרומה. Okay, so what are we saying here, right? Here he brings a truma. Let's see if he explains it. על זה ואם אינו עושה רק מצה אחד. Okay, let's read something else. Anyway, I'll explain the Gemara for before we go on. So he says right like this, that the Gemara says that they used to make the loaves smaller. So he says, if you do it like that, it's not good. Gemara asks. Abaya asks, why is that? Because then you're removing the obligation of challah. So he answers, right? Yeah, okay, you're right, but we have a solution for that. What's the solution? We put them in a basket, right? And the basket combines them. So that's we can still do the challah. So this way, as we said, right, we accomplish both tasks here, both goals we accomplish. We have challah because they're in the basket, and we have also the and they're also not too large. So this way, there's no concern of leavening. Okay, good. So yeah. And he goes on, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha k'Rabbi Eliezer katav sefer Torah al zeh ve'im eno oseh rak matzah echad. So he says, right, the Gemara concludes there that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. So what does that mean? What did Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer says that the basket combines them when it comes to the issue of challah. So therefore, right, that's halacha, and that's how we do. We put them in the basket and it combines them. Right? As we already said, right, there's also another solution, which is to stick them together, one or the other. Right? Okay, so let's go on. So says the Truma, Sefer Truma. So it says if he's only making, let's say, one matzah. So he says then it's better. So he says then, right, you should make a larger loaf. In other words, enough that you should have the obligation of challah. Because you're going to take challah for sure, right, without any doubts. So this rabbi is telling you, right, that if you're making only one matzah, don't follow the advice we just gave you, which is to make the, to make it smaller and all that. Just the opposite, right? We want to be at the edge, we want to be on the limit there. So what does that mean? We want to make sure that we have 3.5 pounds in that one loaf. Why? Because this way we know for sure that you're going to take challah with a blessing. That's what he's saying. Okay. Good. So he says there's also no concern of leavening, if it's just a little bit bigger, In other words, we got a little bit over 3.5 pounds, a little bit of an overmeasure. Okay, it's no big deal, it's not going to become leavened because of that, a little bit more. That's what he's saying. Okay, interesting. Katav Rabbeinu Beturus. In other words, he prefers, this rabbi, that you should make sure you do the challah, right? This is more important than the issue of, making the loaf a little bit too large. No big deal. So it says, the two writes, You're there, Siman Shin Cafe, right? Chapter 325. אם נתנם על הלוח וכיוצא בדבר שאין בו בית קיבול, כתב הרמב"ם, שהוא ספק, right, אם מצרפו אם לאו. So, right, when we say, right, you should put it into a basket. So that means that it should have, something which has a receptacle. Because if you just put it on a board, which has no receptacle, so then the Rambam says, right, we're not really sure if the board will combine them like that. So they're only combined in a basket or something like that, which has receptacle. There's walls around, that are going right. There's a rim there. Okay. ואם הוא חלה מדבריהם פטורה. לכן כשמצרפן בכלי צריך שלא יצא ממנו שום דבר למעלה מדופני הכלי. So the Rambam says something interesting, right? Whatever. It says that if there's a doubt regarding the chala, right, whether you're obligated or not, so the rule is that we go lenient. Why is that? Because nowadays chala is not from the Torah, it's from the rabbis. So the rule is, that the rules from the rabbis, the laws of the rabbis, we go lenient in the case of doubt. So here also, right, we will go lenient. So therefore he says, right, that's not a good thing. We don't want to do like that. So what does that mean? Don't use like the board, right? To use a basket, which has a receptacle. This way it's for sure. Because the board, right, according to Rambam, is a doubt. Okay. Good. ולכן כשמצרפים לכלי צריך שלא יצא ממנו שום דבר למעלה בדופני הכלי, ואם מכסה הפת במפה חשיב כמו כלי לצרפן והשם יתבהר בעזרת השם. So he says another thing, which is that therefore, right, the rule is that we don't want that the challah, the dough, right, should be above the walls of the utensil, of the basket, because that's considered to be like, it's like on a board, because it's not surrounded by the rim, by the right. It's not a receptacle like that. It's not inside the receptacle. It's outside. Okay, so therefore you don't want to do it that way, right? Otherwise, it's going to be again, right, same problem as putting it on a board. Another thing is, he says that if you cover, the bread with some kind of a tablecloth, right? Some kind of a handkerchief. It's considered to be like, that it also gets combined, right? The handkerchief also combines them, right? The tablecloth, whatever it is, right? Some kind of a material thing there. Okay, so that's, we're getting into now the laws of challah, which is explained over there. So, right, that's where we study those laws. But here, right, we're just cross-referencing it here a little bit. Okay, so anyway, right, כתב בספר המנהיג, right, says the מנהיג, שצריך להפריש חלה בכל מידה ומידה, ואין להקיף כמה עיסות ולהפריש מאחד על כולן, כי הסל מצרפן, לא אמרו אלא ושלא היה בכל אחד שיעור חלה ולחומרה, אבל לא להקל עד כדי שנה. So says this rabbi that you got to separate, when you separate the challah, you got to separate it from each one which has the proper size, right? Which is, we said, 3.5 pounds. So what does that mean, right? Don't separate one from the other, right? In other words, for the other. One loaf, which is also large, don't separate from there for another large loaf. That's what he's saying. Right? Because he says, right, that which we said, that the basket combines them, that was said regarding stringency, not leniency, right? So this will be a leniency. So therefore he says, right, we don't do that. Interesting. Okay. ונראה אפילו לדידן שאין לנו נותנים חלה לכהן So it says even by us, we don't give the challah to the kohen, right? Nowadays, the kohen can't eat it, so there's no reason to give it to him. Shaykh Lomar ken ukvar, so it's still relevant to say that what we just said. Ukvar izkir svara zo beperek elu ovrin. This was also explained over there in this parak, right? In the Mordechai B'Shem Rabbi Eliezer Mimitz, in the name of this rabbi. Katab sheSefer HaMitzvot, and he writes that the Sefer HaMitzvot, ve'avi Azri cholkin alav. These two rabbis are arguing with this. V'kach hem divrei Rabbeinu be'alachot el-chala. The same thing also with the laws of chala in the Torah. Ve'ad rabbi hekel b'sheyesh bechol isa shiur chala. So it's just the opposite, right? That he was lenient regarding this. When each one has a size of chala, each dough, he wants to separate from one to the other, one for the other. You don't even need to combine it with a basket. You don't have to touch either. The fact that they're both of them in front of him, it's good enough already. To separate one from one for the other. So the Torah doesn't agree with this, what we just said, right? In the name of the manhig. He has a different approach here. Okay. He also writes here, right? Also the Torah in this place. This is the words of the Rosh. As well. The Rosh says the same thing. It says also I found in Tshuva Ashkenazi the same thing over there. That says the same thing. שהייתי מצרף כל המצות לסל אחד אחר אפייתן בפסח. So it says, you were wondering, right? How did I do that? To combine all the loaves of matzah in one basket, right? After the baking on Passover. And I take challah from one of them. כתבת דרבי אליעזר לא אמר הסל מצרפן אלא לחומרה. It says, and you said, right, that when Rabbi Eliezer says that the basket combines them, that's only for stringency, but not for leniency. Dalech Mori, so it says Dalech Lach Mori, Shebechol Sarfat Nohagim Ken. So he says you should know that in France, right, that's the custom there. V'gam Sefer Truma Pasak Ken. This rabbi paskin like that. V'yodea ani sheraita devarecha be'avi Ezri. He says I know you saw it, right, in your theory in Avi Ezri, right? This book. So he says, "Lama lo ra'ita maskanat hamita." He says, "Why didn't you look at the conclusion over there? Right? You didn't see the conclusion." Ki besof tevarav katav devadai sharei la'asot ken. Because in the end he writes, right, that's for sure allowed to do that. So in other words, he thought, right, that this rabbi was being stringent, but the truth is he was being lenient in the end, right? He just read till the end, by the way. I always tell people, by the way, this thing, which is that, it's a good advice when you're reading Divrei Torah, words of Torah, whatever it's halacha, whatever, especially halacha, right? Don't stop in the middle and analyze, until you finish the whole thing, because a lot of the questions you're going to be asking, when you stop, are always going to be answered in the continuation, So before you start asking all kinds of wise questions, just read through it, and you'll find in the end, right, that your question may be already answered. So there's no reason to stop and to, hypothesize. Better to just keep reading and finish it, So that's what we're saying over here, The problem is this rabbi, didn't read it till the end, so he didn't get to the conclusion. He stopped somewhere in the middle, and started, hypothesizing, whatever. So because of that, he didn't get to the right conclusion here. Okay, so yeah. That's what inexperienced learners do, Inexperienced learners, they stop in the middle and, hypothesize. Why is this? Why are you asking why? First finish it. Right, now you have all the questions. You don't even know what it's going to say, right in the end. So first get to the end. Okay, whatever, right? It's one of those things, one of those tricks. Okay, so let's go on. So it goes on to tell him, the custom you have, he says, to take from each dough, mi'at, a little bit, right? Ve'ata oseh mikol chalot charara, and you make from all these chalot, right? Like one little cake there, right? One little pita, whatever. Echad en ze minhag, says kasher. That's not, it says not a kosher custom like that. Why? Ki bitoch shata mashe otan hem ba'im lidei chimutz. So it says, you know why? Because since you're waiting, you're delaying the process by doing this, which takes time. So it says you're getting into a danger of leavening the dough. Okay, there you go. So it says, right, Berek Habayit, ואחר כך מצטט בתוך תשובת הרשב"א. It says, I also found in תשובת הרשב"א, ונראה לי, so it seems to me, it says, שהיא תשובת מהר"ם. It's like the תשובת מהר"ם, really. Right? עד כאן, that's the end of it. ונראה, דהיינו דווקא בתוך הפסח. So he says that only applies during Passover. אבל אם לש קודם הפסח, but he says if he needed it before Passover, שפיר דם, it's okay, no problem. לעשות כמו שהיה אותו חכם עושה, to do like that Rabbi used to do, ליטול מכל עיסה ועיסה, to take from each, right, dough, מעט, a little bit. וזה נכון יותר מלהמתין עד לאחר האפייה. So this is better than waiting after the baking, right? As we said, right, after the baking it's already like בדיעבד, it's not לכתחילה to do like that. וכל שכן בארץ ישראל, it's all more so in Eretz Israel. דיקה למחש, שמא יאכל ממנה. So it says there's concern that maybe he'll eat from it, ואין תקנה להפריש על מה שנאכל ממנה. So he says there's no way to rectify, right? There's no rectification to separate something which has already been eaten, right? In Eretz Israel, you can't do it that way. Only outside, only in the diaspora. מכל מקום, אם יהיה אפשר להפריש מכל אחד מפני המהירות. So it says, but anyway, right? In any case, if it's not possible to separate from each loaf because of right, it takes a lot of time, whatever. Shapir dame leafrish achar afia miyad. So then you can also do after the baking as well. As we said, right? Wait till it bakes and then do it after. Okay, interesting. ואם ידוע שהיה ביסה שיעור חלה ושכח להפריש חלה. So it says if he knows that there was in the dough size of challah, and he forgot to separate the challah, as we said, right? What do? You do it after the baking, right? What do? You put them into a basket, and you're gonna have the size in the basket. Okay. So he says, right, regarding this, but Yosef says that was a tour. Ken katav Rosh. That's what it says in Rosh. Perek elu ovrin, right? In this perek, midelo maite the Rabbi Eliezer, since it doesn't bring the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, elam haned neshed Elisha kafiza, right? Only regarding those women, right? That do the kneading, whatever. The lo haya bo shiur chala. They didn't have the proper size of chala. But if in the beginning it had the size of chala, it already became obligated, even though you separated afterwards and make smaller loaves. But since you had one dough originally, it already became obligated then. So then you don't need a basket anymore. That's what he's trying to say. Okay. So it says, then you don't need a basket, as was said, right? Right? So then what do you need? Just make sure that they're all, there, present in front of you. And this way, right, you can take from the other one for the other. Not like it implies in the Rif, Rashi and Rashi, that even though it was already, in the beginning, right, there was a size of challah, so as they hold it, nevertheless, you do require still to combine them in a basket. But he says the halacha is not like that. So he says the Ran also writes like the Rosh, right? And that's halacha, by the way. Okay. So it says, implies from the words of Rabbeinu, the Tur, if there is already size of challah, right? In the beginning, then you have to you should separate the challah from the dough, right, and not wait till afterwards. Before the baking. Also Rambam says this, right? Bilchot Bikurim over there in the laws of Bikurim, first fruits. Ve'agur katav b'shem Shibur Leket. Right, this rabbi writes the name of this rabbi. Bezel Shono. This language is like this. But Rabbi Meir katav dafka b'diavad tov le'asot ken. So Rabbi Meir says, right, this is only b'diavad to do like that. What does that mean? To combine it in a basket, right? What does that mean after the baking, right? That's b'diavad. But lechatchila, no, you shouldn't do that, right? So don't wait till you bake it. You should do it beforehand. Because right, the verse says has to be the beginning, right? What does it mean beginning? Before the baking. That's the way it should be. Lechatchila. Belda isa. So what does that mean? It's still right while it's still dough. That's when you should separate. אבל בפסח ובכל יום טוב שמשקרא עליה השם, right? שמשקרא עליה השם. So it says regarding Passover and Yom Tov, and also any Yom Tov, that since it calls it already the name, right? The challah by asul taltalo, you can't carry it. The gam en sorfin, you can't. It's muktzah. You can't carry it. It says also en on sorfin kodashim b'Yom Tov. We don't burn also, right, holy things on Yom Tov. So what does that mean? You can't burn the challah. Hoil velo efshar b'inyan acher mutar. But it says since it's impossible in any other way, there's no other scenario for it. So therefore, it's allowed. כתבתי בסמוך, so as I already wrote close by, שאם אי אפשר להפריש בכל עיסה, if it's not possible to separate from each dough מפני המהירות because you're in a hurry, מפרישין אחר אפייה, מיד. So then what we do is we wait till after the baking and we do it then. So in other words, if you're in a hurry, so what does that mean you're in a hurry? You don't want you don't want leavening to occur. So therefore, right, you want to get it into the oven. You want to shove it in there as fast as possible. So this way, right, if that's the case, then do it afterwards, he says, right? If you've got no choice. אפילו שכח ואכל קצת יפריש על המותר, דחלת חוצה לארץ, אוכל והולך ואחר כך מפריש. So he says also, he brings a tour, right, who said that if you're in the diaspora, right, you can still separate the challah even though you already ate from it, right? Just leave over a little bit in the end, and that's your challah. So regarding that, says Bet Yosef, Memra de Shmuel bechorot. It comes from Shmuel in the Bechorot, Perk Ad Kama, right, which is Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph. Katav Mordechi bePerk Elu Amovrin. This rabbi says, Ve'im shachach ve'lo yifrish me'erev Yom Tov. So as if he forgot, he didn't separate the challah before Yom Tov. En lismoch ala shiur hamatzah. So he says you shouldn't rely on whatever gets left over from the matzah. Liot ochel ve'olech ach ve'achar kach mafrish. To wait till the end, and then separate from there. Right? Kedin truma, like truma. Ve'im hayta kol yisad nirosha v'yachad. So it's because if the whole dough was kneaded together, right, az haya mutar, then it will be allowed. Ach matzot haniloshit b'kol echad levada. But it says when it comes to matzot, it's not like one dough, It's like each one is separate. That's the way they do it. Each little matzah is a separate dough. So you can't really, say that they're combined. They're not combined. Elam din zeh says they don't have this din. כתב רבינו שמואל, says this rabbi, צריך להפות מצה אחת ובשעת הפרשה יפריש אחת על כולן. So he says what you got to do, he says this rabbi, that you got to bake one matzah, and then at the time of the separation of the challah, he's going to separate one for all. But tiftor et ha'acherot, and this way going to absolve all the other loaves as well. But tziruf, right, by combining them, adkan v'kach katav Tosfot. That's what it says in Tosfot. Perek Kama Yom Tov u'mashma dehainu keshelo nistarfu besal. So it says that's only if they were not combined in a basket, right? Okay, so there's it's a little bit confusing all this stuff, but let's see the Shulchan Aruch, right, to make it turn into something cohesive over here a little bit more.
Kavod ha'av, the Katan Rabbeinu Shmuel, is that the same one who wrote the blessing of the heretics in Amidah?
Oh, okay. Wow, I don't know how you got this question all of a sudden in your head, but actually the answer is that It's not the same guy.
Oh, okay. This is a different one. Yeah.
How we know?
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's several ways to know. First of all, that guy is called Shmuel Katan, right?
Hakatan. Ah, okay,
Right.
okay.
That's his name, you know?
Oh, that's
And this guy is he's not Katan, he's just Shmuel.
okay.
Okay.
That's where I get confused.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so right. There's a little guy and there's a big guy, right? Two different guys.
Well, Hakatan is different than Katan Rabbeinu Shmuel, right?
Katan means, he's a little guy, right?
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Katan means small.
Small, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Why they call him, by the way, this name, Shmuel Katan? Because he was short, or what he was?
He was humble, I think, no?
Yeah, right. He was in humility, exactly. He humbled himself. They call him Katan.
Katan. Okay, thank you
Okay,
for the
but this guy, right, Shmuel, he's not called Katan, and also it's a different generation, because
Okay.
Shmuel Katan was many generations before this.
Okay.
He was from the Tanaim, not from the Amoraim, right? Shmuel was from the Amoraim, and Shmuel Katan was from the Tanaim.
Tonight. Okay, thank you. I'm making
Okay.
notes of this. I won't forget.
All right. Okay, interesting. So as we said, right, let's go on. Okay. So yeah. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch, right? So it says in Shulchan Aruch, "Mipnei shetzarich ledakdek b'shiur ha'isa," it says because you have to be careful, right, regarding the size of the dough, right, as we said, not to make it too big. Shelo le'arbot ba mishum chashash kimutz, because there's a concern about leavening, right? We talked about that yesterday. Since you have to be careful about that, so it says umutav sheima'et ba. So therefore, right, better to make it smaller, as we said, because of that. And so you don't want to be like on the border, There's no reason to be on the border. Try to make it a little bit, give a little bit leeway and a little bit slack, make it smaller. Okay, it says lachen tov lekarev ha'isot yachad b'shat hafrashat chala. So it says therefore what you should do is, right, in order to kill two birds with one stone, as we said, right? What does that mean? On the one hand, we want it to be not too large, right? And we don't want it to be on the border. So what we do is we make it much smaller. But we want to separate challah, right, also. And that's too small for challah, these loaves, right? So therefore what we do is we combine them, by sticking them together, so they're a little bit stuck together. So this way, right, they're all combined. And this way we can separate the challah. And then, right, once we separate the challah, we'll separate them again, right, and put them into the oven, right? That's what we're gonna do. This way you did both, right? You accomplished both goals. Right? Okay. That's one way to do it, right? As we said, that's the preferred way. Because as we said, right, the preferred way is to separate the challah before the baking, not after. Okay, so that's one thing. The shema yesh behem shelo haya ba'ash kishur ve'im ei efshar, right? So the reason we do that, as we said, because right, it could be right that these loaves don't have the size, the proper size, because we make them smaller. Okay. ואם אי אפשר להפריש חלב בעודה עיסה מפני המהירות, so it says, but if you're not able to do that for some reason, right? So what's the reason why you can't do it? What's the big deal to stick them together? So he says, you know why? Because you're in a hurry, right? You want to get into the oven, as we said, right? You don't want this thing to leaven, So that means we want to get into the oven as fast as possible, right? As we said, maximum is 18 minutes. So you don't want to, you want to be under 18 minutes, right? That's the whole thing. So if you're worried about that, and therefore you don't have time to stick them together and play around with that stuff. So then what? What do you do? Yafrishena achar afia miyad. So then you should do it after the baking, right? If that's the case. That's what we said in the Bet Yosef. Same thing over here, right? Do it after the baking, right? So what? Sheiten kol matzot basal. How do you do that? Right? You can't stick them together anymore. Why? Because they're already baked, right? How can you stick them together, right? What are you going to do? Use glue? right? Right? When we say stick them together, we mean like the dough sticks, together, But once it's baked, it doesn't stick together. So what you do is, right, put them into a basket, right? And that's combines them, as we said, right? So then it's going to be combined for challah. And you're going to separate the challah after the baking, right? וזהו הדרך היותר נכון. So he says, this is the more proper way, he says. Oh, so he's telling you, right, the better way here is to do it after the baking. Even though in general, right, we say you should try to take the challah before, but here, after is better. Why is that? So the answer is that because we don't want it to leaven, right, by leaving it out too long. So this is the reason why we prefer to do it after the baking. Because, the issue of leavening is much more important than the issue of challah, As we said, right, challah is only rabbinical nowadays. But leavening, is from the Torah, it's a big deal, you know what I mean? You're getting into big trouble there. So therefore, we prefer to, right, we prefer to do the after the baking. Okay. So it says the Ramah here, right, ואם היה בו שיעור חלה ושכח להפריש, he brings all the other stuff, right? That not all, but he brings some of it, right? Whatever, right? That we saw in the Beit Yosef. So he says, what about if you, right? That loaf had the size of challah. The problem is he forgot to, separate the challah before the baking, right? So you should do afterwards, right? Again, same thing. Right? And you don't need, right? In a case like that, you don't need to combine them with a basket. Remember what the reason is? So the reason is because it already had the size when you made the dough. So once it already had that size during the making of the dough, you don't need to recombine them again. It was already combined as it is, right? In the beginning, it was combined. So therefore, in a case like that, you don't need a basket, right? To put your basket on the side, right? Just to take out the challah, right? Separate the challah. That's the important thing. Okay. Good. ואם לקח ממקצת היסוד ומקצת לא תקח, מתערבו, צריך לקח חלה מכל אחד ואחד, או ילוש עיסה אחרת, ויקח ממנו גם כן על אותו שנתערבו. Oh, interesting, right? So what is Ramah saying here? So it says, if he took from some of the doughs, right, challah, and some of them he didn't take. And now the problem is, right, they got mixed up now, these doughs together, or the bread got mixed up. In other words, it's all in one, we can't tell the difference between one and the other. So what do? You're not sure which is the loaf that was taken the challah, and you're not sure which is the one where the challah was not taken. So now they're all mixed up, right? You don't know which one is which. So what do you do now? So says the Ramah, very simple, right? You should take challah from each one. So this way, right, you know for sure that the ones that you didn't take challah, the challah was taken now. We're just being stringent over here because of the doubt. So take challah from each one, even though some of them already you took challah. So do it again, just to be on the safe side, right? That's what he's telling you. Or he says there's also another solution, which is, make another dough right now, right? Need another dough, and take from there on those chalot, right, which were not separated. You can do that, as we said, right? As long as they're all in front of you, you can take from one for the other. That's what he's telling you to do. So he gives you here two solutions, right, to this problem. Okay. Goes on. So if he knows that one matzah for sure is obligated for challah, you can take from there on the others, right? The ones that have doubt. That's another way of doing it. Okay, very good. So that's the end of it. I guess we'll stop here, right? We did almost an hour. Not exactly, but 45 minutes, whatever, not too bad. Okay, so Bezrat Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. And right, you should be Zoche Bezrat Hashem to all you ladies to separate the challah to the mitzvah of challah, right? Which is supposed to be a good thing for women, to do, right? The segula, whatever. So you should be all Zoche Bezrat Hashem to do the mitzvah of challah properly. Maybe even for Passover, if you want to make matzot, right? We'll see, right? What you're gonna do. You're gonna make matzot or not in the end, or you're gonna just go to the store and buy. Okay, either way, it's all good, Baruch Hashem. As long as you mean Lashem Shemaim, doesn't matter what you do. Okay, God bless. So we'll see you tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch.
Kol Tov. Thank you so much.
All the best.